And Esther had asked us to talk about intimacy. And one of the ways that we talk about any topic in Zen practice is often through telling stories. There are a lot of stories that carry the teachings in Zen practice in a tradition that goes back maybe about 1,500 years. The Buddha was born 2,600 years ago, and Buddhism arose in India, and then it traveled in all directions east. It went northeast to Tibet, where Tibetan Buddhism arose as its own particular way of practicing. And it went southeast from India to Southeast Asia, to all the many countries around the Southeast Asian part of the world. And there was also a particular kind of practice that arose. And it also went east to China. And when it came to China, it encountered teachings from the Confucian tradition and the Tao tradition, the Taoist tradition. And that's where Zen was really born. Zen is a combination of the down-to-earthness of Taoism and Confucianism of Chinese culture, and the mysticism of Taoism, especially, kind of way of encountering the world directly, but not in just an earthly way, but also in a spiritual way, you might say, something that touches us so that we encounter the world as it is, the clouds in the sky, the flowers, and the grass as it arises from the earth, and the human beings and other beings we encounter, all as part of the same fabric, this one truth, this one awakened nature that we call the Buddha nature, or the way of awakening. And in China, stories arose that explained or exemplified some of the teachings. They're called, in Japanese, the word is koan, and koan means a public case. It refers to a legal case, like a legal example. So someone would overhear a dialogue between a teacher and a student and then repeat it somewhere else as a teaching. Did you hear what so-and-so said? Isn't that amazing? And then it would go on, and almost like a form of spiritual gossip. So people would hear these stories, and then they became, about 500 years later, teaching stories that teachers would use. They would say, back in the day, so-and-so said this to so-and-so. What do you make of it? And so we teach this as a practice, in addition to being present with the breath and body, to some of our students. And we also talk about these stories in our talks. And when Esther said that she would like something about intimacy, 3 stories sprang to mind, but I'm only going to tell one of them. And the one that keeps popping up more than any other is a very well-known story among Zen practitioners about intimacy. It's about a man who was a student, and he was wandering around from temple to temple, from monastery to monastery, trying to learn about the teachings. This was a common practice. Students would come to temples or monasteries, sit and learn with a teacher, and then they would go on and test themselves, test their understanding with other teachers. And there were, in China of that time, so many different temples where these teachings could be shared. So this one student came to a teacher, and the teacher said, "What are you doing?" And the student said, "I'm wandering around on pilgrimage." And the teacher asked him, "What are you doing wandering around on pilgrimage?" And the student said, "I don't know." And the teacher said, "Not knowing, that's the most intimate." So that's the whole story. You can imagine that story being shared from place to place, and people saying, what was going on between these two people? What was happening? Why did the teacher approve somebody saying, I don't know? And in Zen practice, we are very focused on experience, not, as Esther was just saying, on what we read and understand from books, what we might memorize, what other teachers and philosophers have said, but what we discover through this practice of sitting still and upright, noticing the arising of thoughts, of various emotions, of physical sensations and sense perceptions, coming and going and coming and going, and just for this period of time, not reacting to them, not doing what we usually do, which is to do something to fix the situation. Just for a short period of time, we stay present to what is actually happening. So this is our experience, and we learn quite a bit from the experience of sitting still and upright. We sometimes say sitting still and upright in the middle of it all. And this student in the story had been doing that for quite some time. He had been sitting and practicing and getting to know his innermost self, his way of being human in his particular way. And then he decided to go wandering and to find other teachings from other teachers that might help him. And when the teacher asked him, what are you doing wandering about on pilgrimage? In other words, what's the purpose of this? What do you think you're going to learn? What do you think you're going to come to understand? And of course, if we're really honest, before we learn something, we don't understand it. We don't understand things until after we learn them. So this stance of not knowing, of being open and curious, this is something actually quite praiseworthy. I don't know, the student says when he's challenged by the teacher. I don't know what the purpose of my pilgrimage is. I don't know what I'm doing wandering around here, because you can't know until you know. You can't understand until you understand. Before that, it's all speculation and theory. But then it's the real thing, the actual thing itself. And so the teacher praises him by saying, not knowing is the most intimate. That is, you can't get any closer to what's really happening until you drop away all your knowing, all your learning, all your theories and speculations about the way life is, meeting things directly, as we say, intimately, a complete connection.